Hello and welcome to Noble Mind.
Noble Mind is a podcast exploring mindfulness, meditation, and psychology.
Before we get started, I want to invite you to come to Unwind, a free drop-in practice session that I'm leading each week on Zoom. It lasts about 30 minutes and just long enough, hopefully, to fit between all your other tasks and to-dos. Each week, I give a brief science-backed tip to help with stress management or well-being enhancement. Then we spend about 15 minutes in a guided relaxation, meditation, or contemplation practice. Lastly, we end with a few minutes for discussion and personal connection. I encourage people to make the session work for themselves, so if you prefer to call in or keep your camera off, that is just fine. You can get more details and sign up to get the Zoom link and call-in information at drkateking.com/unwind. Hope to see you there. Hello, I'm Dr. Kate King.
And I'm Alex Gökçe. In this episode, we talk to Paola Chang about spirituality, mindfulness, self-compassion, and how her lived experience navigating multiple cultures and religions have shaped her worldview and sense of identity.
Paola is a spiritual director trained at the Heart of Life Yarra Theological College, University of Divinity in Australia. She is also a mental health social worker and meditation teacher. She learned meditation as a child with her Buddhist father, later converted to Catholicism, studied with the Chinmaya Mission, and is passionate about interfaith dialogue.
You can learn more about Paola, get this episode's show notes, and join our email list at noblemindpodcast.com. We hope you enjoy the show.
Thank you for joining us today. We're here with Paola Chang, and maybe we could just get started with having you tell us a little bit about yourself.
I think I'm a child of the universe. That's how I would call it, but also a grain of sand and a work of art in progress most of the time. I think we're still trying to evolve and see. So my name is Paola. I'm partner to Carlos and a mother to Natalie, also a mother to Joy Scouts. So I'm still a scout leader. I'm a sister to many, an auntie, a grand auntie, a friend, colleague, mother to Bessie, my pet dog. So I'm also a spiritual director. I'm also a meditation facilitator in the mindful-based cognitive therapy and a trained teacher in the mindful self-compassion. So I'm also a social worker that works in mental health and has been since my formation as a social worker. I haven't always been a social worker. I became a public servant for over 20 years, work in what you would probably deem social services. But I suppose the seed for social work also started. Probably my mother was more of a barefoot social worker, or my parents were, because we had a shop. I think I'm part of the memories of my parents and my ancestors. And in a way, as you keep doing the mindfulness meditation, you're part of the whole cosmos. We are just that common humanity.
Yes.
And what do you see that ancestral lineage to be?
For me, it's a very big mixture because I know DNA-wise, so people look at me and say, oh, you're Chinese. I can't speak Chinese to save my life. I did learn some Hakka, which is probably the dialect my parents use. But again, it's in the recess of my brain, I suppose. And when I go back to Mauritius, because that's the island I was born, if I catch up with aunties and stay there for a little while, it sort of come back. But again, you don't practice it. If you don't use it, like I said, like a muscle, you lose it.
Could you say more about the barefoot social worker term?
The barefoot social worker, my mom, we had a shop. So I grew up basically in a shop that was a grocery store, but was also a bar. So I think my formation, even in mental health, started there. And not far down the street was the mental health facility that houses the people. And they used to come to drink in our shop. Sometimes they would, escape. And they would come and drink and things. So I think My parents were in some ways barefoot social workers because they would take anybody who would come. And also as a child, I saw like, there were single parents that would come and confide in the shop. They would leave. One particular woman come in mind, a sort of neighbors, because they are probably about 4 or 5 houses away from us, would leave her son on the doorstep of the shop and go to work. And so my mom would be feeding her son because she knew there was a shop and there would always be something. And my mom would be feeding this. And my mom we've had homeless people stay. Even when the shop got closed, my sister continued on and had a homeless man inside the old shop, like the shop had closed. And we had a house at the back. So, and I think that seeds of social work is still in there. Like my parents didn't have the formation of a social workers as we've been, but it was there. And also the shop serve a bit as a community because, people that had alcohol problems were actually in the shop. And a lot of people came and confided their sort of sufferings and stuff in the shop. So that was sort of environment I grew up with.
Seems like you would be destined to be a social worker growing up in that kind of setting, or run away from it. Wondering what inspired you to start meditation?
I used to say that I started meditation as a teenager because I learned yoga. And now I look back and I thought I was probably, whether it's faith, whatever you believe in, it was actually Chinmaya, the Swamiji that came to Mauritius at the time. But I had no idea of he founded the Chinmaya Mission. No idea of how high he was in the thing because he was just our shop or my parents' house was next to what we call a Gita Mandal, which is, it's like a hall, but it's also used for for the Hindus to do their religious services.
Oh.
So, and we have like what we call a Pandit was our neighbor. So they were doing yoga classes and I was interested in yoga. So I went and did yoga and meditation. One day I was sitting in the hall meditating and I don't know how it came about at John, and I thought, oh no, my journey to meditation started long before that. I remember the time when I was probably 4 to about 6 years old or 7, where I was chanting Buddhist hymn with my dad. But I couldn't read Chinese. You asked me to read Chinese. I have no idea. I would have just chanted as a child does, copying my dad, would have chanted those hymns, not knowing even what they meant, but just going with the flow. And then obviously when I migrated to Australia, it sort of fell in the back as, when you don't have a network to really hold you to account. Until I met my Tai Chi teacher, which was Beverly Milne, and she wrote The Essence of Tai Chi. And I started doing Tai Chi with her and also meditation, and it sort of resonated with me. And then I was sort of interested in a spiritual direction. Remembering my father was a Buddhist when I was born. At 11, I stood up against my father and said I wanted to become a Catholic.
You did literally the opposite of what I did.
That would be interesting to hear your story, Catherine. So I stood up to my dad, and my mom was always on the fringe of a Christian, but never had been baptized or whatever. So at 11, I became a Catholic. And the only stipulation at the time, my father relented and said, all right, he wanted Chinese godfather and Chinese godmother, which my mom had to run like virtually 48 hours before my baptism. I had no idea who my godfather and godmother were going to be. Whereas before, my principal of my primary school and my teacher wanted to become my godparents. So they remained de facto godparents to me. So I have remained in the Catholic faith, although I did question the faith. Even deep down, I never believed in that thing about confession, what they used to call confession, and now they call it reconciliation, about, oh, you go and tell your sins, and then tomorrow you do the sins again, and it comes again, and you're going to be pardoned. And somewhere along the line, it didn't fit with me at the time. And so I wanted to go deeper. And that, I suppose, took me to the yoga, took me to the meditation. At the same time, I was still going to church. And I think one of the things that with the meditation that I did with the Swamiji, because I was allowed to also sing Om Jesus, and I thought, great, I'll stay. That's great. And, it's about that universality of things. And I think that's what attracted me. I think I was lucky also because I was raised in a country that was probably multiracial, multicultural, multi-faith. So it didn't matter. Religion didn't matter. Whatever religion you belonged to, it didn't matter. Whatever race you were, it didn't matter. My neighbors were Hindu, Muslim, I had colleagues, were all of different faiths.
So you have not yet mentioned where the self-compassion thread comes in. I'd love to hear a little bit more about self-compassion and also how you connect that to your spirituality.
I suppose in the spiritual teachers I've also met that the mindful self-compassion resonated so much with me that I was really taken with this. And then when Chris Kermer did the teacher training, I was coming to Australia in 2018. So I thought, I'll do that too. So that started my journey into becoming a teacher.
We haven't yet defined what spiritual direction is for our listeners. Could you just give us a quick...
Okay, so spiritual direction has actually, they probably should change it more to spiritual companionship. So it's not about, a lot of people come to me, oh, can you direct me here and there? No, I'm not here to direct you anywhere. I am here as a companion on the journey, basically to help you, because I think every time, even in social work, and that's where probably all of this intersect for me, we only get one part of the puzzle. We only get one part of the picture of the person, of where they are at or where they are in their life or for whatever. Like you said, we carry the memories of our ancestors. We carry our own memories, of joy, of pain, of sadness, of, good times and all the suffering and whatever. But I think if we can help somebody maybe go a little bit deeper, and also in a safe way, and that's what mindful self-compassion also does in some ways, but also in spiritual direction. And we know we don't own that. Because the person at the end owns it. So for me, that also comes with this empowerment that we teach in social work. So I'm not the one to tell you. And of course, a lot of people come to social work, fix me, do this for me, can you go and do this? But again, it's about really wheeling this back and go, hey, yes, of course, if somebody's in crisis, what you have to get somebody out of a situation, you go to that practical level of giving the support and giving whatever. But I think fundamentally when we go, we are all on this inner journey. That's why I call myself a work of art in progress, because I think we are constantly doing it. We're constantly delving into who am I? Yes, we play all these different roles, and about the multiple self concept. I'm a mother, so I behave this way. A partner, I behave this way. I'm a colleague, I behave this way. I'm a sister, and so there are roles. For me, there are roles that we all have in our life. And in spiritual direction, it's not that I tell you to go and do this. It's about I will accompany you along your journey so that it is a safe journey for you to delve deeper. But a lot of times, sometimes people run away from spirituality because they think, oh, this is something like to do with religion. And so then they equate that with religion, and so they box it. And I think because in some ways we always have this mind that compare and contrasts and do all that, but also we have the ego that comes in. I have to be this, or I've been slighted, or I've been on the outer, I've been bullied, we all have had that to a certain degree. But again, I think with mindfulness, with meditation, and also in spiritual direction, the thing that we learn to meditate. And this is the other thing that people forget, that in Christianity, we had the wisdom fathers, that we had Jesus as an example of a meditator that went up the mountain to be by himself. And so for me, it's not a different world. It's how people perceive it. It's all in the one. Again, it's like I say to people, this might be your arms and your legs. They do different things, but they're all part of you. And I think Thich Nhat Hanh also put this very beautifully, that we are part of this world and the world is in us. And so with mindful self-compassion, when we call it of common humanity, and I go, Jesus was a Jew, rejected by his own at the time. But hey, did he reject he actually sat with the taxpayers, he sat with the prostitute. That doesn't make him be into one. But this is tell you about the compassion that Jesus had. And so for me, I tell that story because for me that it sits with me. And I think that I know John Kabat-Zinn, when he brought it in the West, wanted to take over the elements of the spirituality in that, because probably in the context of the time. But if you listen to John Kabat-Zinn nowadays, he's actually trying to reel that back and saying it is a spiritual practice. Whether people want to see it as such or not, it is a spiritual practice. Because at the end of the day, that thing is about, again, delving deeper and in our inner world, and I say ultimately we're born to die, but what we do during that time is, do we want to live life at its full, like John Kabat-Zinn put it, every moment, every breath counts? Do we realize even the miracle of our breathing? And John Kabat-Zinn, I think, puts it very well. If we had to rely on ourselves to breathe, we would be dead. If we had to think about breathing, we would be dead. It's true. And I think that's, for me, I find all of this, like I said, different rivers that come back into the ocean.
Spiritual direction. I wonder if you could say more about that for people who are not familiar with it. So it's almost like, would you say it's almost like being a psychotherapist, someone that you meet regularly who can guide you about spiritual matters?
Yes, I think in some ways. But again, the people who come to spiritual direction, I think initially not to treat what they call mental health. They may not even have a concept of mental health or emotional health. It's probably more emotional health. I suppose they come because they've suffered, usually because they've suffered, or they want some clarity in more or less discerning what is the next phase of my life, where I am going. And they've come also with those questions of who am I, in the context of where I live and in all sorts of, like, as social workers, our childhood, our teenage years, our adulthood relationship we have had. And I think all of that are put on the table. But again, they will only come with what is there. But it's about listening deeply. It's about listening with the heart. And that's where, for me, the mindful self-compassion comes, because when you have to listen with the heart, it is hard work. It's also a bit of giving of yourself. But again, how do I, when I'm listening to all these stories of hardship and suffering, without being caught into it in some ways, can I give myself compassion? And, I can't go around hugging everyone. I feel like, need a hug, or some people may not like hug. But my first instinct would be, I want to hug you and just tell you everything will be okay. But I know I can't do this, even at work. So the self-compassion for me and the self-soothing for me help me, and being able to give compassion to others. See, in Christianity, we are not against meditation, because meditation, Father Lawrence Freeman, I think through the work of John Main, has actually brought in. But they do it by a mantra, which I learned when I first started meditation too. So their mantra is Maranatha. I think it's come Lord Jesus, or come Lord. So there's actually about stilling the mind so that you can get to the heart. I suppose the concept in English language doesn't quite because mindfulness is actually heartfulness. This is how I learned mindfulness. And a lot of people equate mindfulness to the mind. And a lot of people, even at work, say to me, oh, I just want to stop my thoughts. And I go, sorry to tell you, you're not going to stop your thoughts. Your thoughts are still going to come. But however, it's about you noticing more your thoughts. And he goes like, no, don't get that. And, very often I get this at work. But again, people come with this misconception that mindfulness is going to be the panacea that's going to cure them of their depression or of their anxiety, and that it's just going to be a mind of nothingness. And I think that's where the misconception comes from. I think it's about really, for me as a facilitator, as a teacher, or even it's to actually try to unwind some of this misconception, because mindfulness is heartfulness. And when we're talking of spiritual direction, another way, it is also heartfulness, is really accompanying somebody in their suffering, holding that suffering with them, and so that they can have a bit more clarity in what they do. I may not know tomorrow what this person has chosen, not chosen, but that's their journey. Again, we've done compassion. Everyone is on their life journey. I'm only a companion on that journey for part of that journey. I may or may not continue on with you, or I may leave you at this point in time in your life, or, you may leave me at this point in time in your life where you feel. So, and this is where, for me, that intersect between mindful self-compassion and spiritual direction comes. And yes, I don't know whether I would equate it to psychotherapy. I think because people come to psychotherapy expecting that their problems will be resolved.
It's very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, it's, for me, I think probably because I had, partly because, people say, oh, poor you or whatever, you grew up in a developing country. But I think we were a developing country according to what standard? To the standard of economy. But we were so full and so rich in terms of culture, in terms of, this life that I was able, probably the time, my sisters may differ, may not agree with me or whatever, but for me, it was a life full of adventures, be running around in the streets like the thing, and the neighbor knew you. So that was the another one. You had the whole community that knew you. And I think Australia is now becoming a little bit more multicultural, but when I first arrived here, it was a sea of grey suits and black suits, everyone going into the train. And yeah.
That's very interesting, because you have lived experience of a rich mix of cultures, religions, identities. The Chinese Civil War, there's political violence, that your refugee experience, immigrant experience. So you have a perspective from within all these cultural streams.
That's right. At the time, I think even after I left, I think at first one was just before independence, but again, it was politically motivated. And the second time around, I think my sister went on holidays, probably in the 1990s, where they had what they call the Creoles, which is more the African descendants of African slaves against the Indian, but that was more something about power, because one of theirs who was, I don't know whether you know the Mauritian dance in Mauritius is Sega.
I don't.
So one of the singers were actually incarcerated and died in a police station. But the police usually, because the Indian population is probably more now in terms of, even though there's different ethnicity within the Indian, because there are Muslim Indian, the Urdu Muslim, there's different, the caste system even still sort of translated at the time, because they were in charge of the police station. So then it became a little bit of a racial thing, although it wasn't very much. It was more about a little bit like what you had in the Black Lives Matter, where, the white people shot the black person. This was more like, okay, so you didn't look after this person that was, I think there was some allegation of bashing inside the thing. So then what they didn't turn against the Indian population, but what they did is they went and tried to burn all of the police station around the island. So then they had, a curfew that happened. And I remember my sister saying, bloody hell, I've just come on the holidays and all I have is a curfew. It's just like, but it didn't last for long. See, I think sometimes the voice of reason then come. It was like, really, what are we doing? We're not, and in those, there are also other people. They are not just Indian that work as police officers, obviously, because we are a multi-racial, multicultural thing. So I think in the end, it prevails. But it was that anger that spilled out. People thought, what is the best thing I can do is go and burn a police station. And
ethnic tensions, political.
Yeah, a little bit, but it's, again, is it political? Is it more about the anger? Is it more, so it sort of get mixed up, I think, in that. But apart from that, we live relatively, I would say, peacefully. It's not been a big, and again, it's elements, like you said, that elements of people that are probably will go to the extreme because they are very upset, and this is the way they express their anger.
Right.
And I think it's all around. It's like you're in or you're out. So there's always this thing about you're in the inner circle or you're in the outer circle. And this mind, what we call this comparative mind. But I think at the end of the day, if each of us can live at peace with ourselves, then we can probably achieve peace outside. But I think it's a long, long way to go because so many people have got so many, gripes with this or with that and stuff, Sometimes I feel like, yes, when you're being wrong, yes, of course your ego suffers. If you're being bullied or whatever, of course your ego suffers. But then you delve deeper and you think, even in mindful self-compassion, when we talk of forgiveness, when we talk of things, how about this person? What has gone on in their life that makes them behave in this way?
Right.
We were talking about this the other day, about our values. So if my value is like, I need to retaliate, so I'm going to go and do something, and this person has bullied me, I'm going to do twice to this person. But what does that say about us? Where sometimes you go, okay, you think I don't know what you've done? I know exactly what you've done. But that's okay, because this is not like you will have your own reckoning in time. You may not, how we call, a lot of people walk and live unconsciously in a way and not, and so meditation actually brings you more to that consciousness of yourself and of who we are and where our being. And I think I said to you at the beginning that, a grain of sand. Because for me, sand, people walk over you. People walk, or we take sand. But sand is also very resilient. That it doesn't change the grain of sand when you walk on the sand. It still brings you, and you build things with sand. You wouldn't be building brick house without the sand. It's an element that you need. So for me, but it also spells humility that I've learned from my spiritual teachers and my parents, that, you stay humble. But that doesn't mean that you let people walk all over you either. It just means how do you then rise above this and be able to still be yourself and not be caught up in that other person, whatever is going on in their ego, whatever is going on. And so I think for me, I am fortunate in the sense that I can fall back on my spiritual teachers.
It's interesting how Paul Gilbert, for instance, talks about how descending into the mud for the lotus to ascend. Yeah.
Thich Nhat Hanh actually says that, no mud, no lotus. So it is in the suffering. Like Thich Nhat Hanh probably would not have been known in the West had the Communist Party not been and really sort of, in a way, push him away from his home country, and he was in exile. You think about it, about the journey he had to go through, but then what did he bring to the world? And he's still bringing to the world. So sometimes it is for that suffering that people sort of, get, I suppose, their calling.
So self-compassion and mindfulness are often taught in a secular context these days. As a spiritual person, do you think that leaves things out of the picture?
I think it does lead to a spiritual life, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. It's that you can call it your interior life, you can call it your inner self, you can call it your heart. You can have different names. The names are not important. For me as a spiritual director, whatever names fits you, and that's okay too. And you may not believe in God because of whatever your circumstances are, of your own experience in life. And in some ways, I think I find mindful self-compassion a bit of a positive psychology too. But it has, there is backdraft that can happen. And I think in those moments of backdraft, that's when people also learn. And so I think we get caught a lot into languages of whether this is spiritual, this is not spiritual.
So you're pointing out that we are essentially spiritual beings, and that learning mindfulness and compassion within a secular context nevertheless continues our sort of spiritual evolution as individuals.
Yeah, it continues our journey. So if you think about what draws the people to mindful self-compassion? Initially, people come, or even mindful-based cognitive therapy, what draws people there? Initially, people would probably come because they've suffered depression, anxiety,
yes.
Or people come to mindful self-compassion because of suffering. And then you find a community of people who have also suffered, and that you are not alone into this. And I think because this Western society where everybody has come into a house and shut down the door and everybody leave in a way, and then COVID has probably, amplified that because you had to stay in your house and you couldn't go out to your neighbor. It's a different sort of, you could be living in a city and not know your neighbor. I think because of the changes in society where we have become more individualistic, people have lost that sense of community.
So then, do you think that teaching mindfulness and compassion within a secular context, does it leave anything out of the picture? Are they different? Those practices different in a spiritual life?
It is different, but it's also at some level it is the same. So it is different in terms of spiritual direction. Usually it's more individualistic in the sense that you accompany one person into their journey. Whereas I think with mindful self-compassion, because we are doing it in a group, it's more a group context, although there are individuals into it, but also it teaches you about this common humanity, that you're not alone in your suffering. So in that context, it's probably different from spiritual direction. Spiritual direction still remain very much an individual thing. So where that person is in the context of their life, I think mindful self-compassion, people come to it or gravitate to it and are learning about themselves. And the two things that bring it together is probably you're learning about yourself in both, but in a different context.
I mean, another thing I wondered is your experience of how compassion may be understood differently in different cultures and religions. But that's a huge topic, obviously.
It is a huge topic, but I can tell you that one for having been a president of an interfaith group. They all have got meditation in some form or the other in most of the religion, or at least the major religion that were part of us, of our group. And they all have compassion. It's not resolved solely for certain category of people. One of the things that really mark, I think, my thing as a president, there was, I don't know whether you heard of it, we had the Burke Street. There was a guy who was mentally unwell and had been so he actually did donuts in a car and actually killed a number of people in Burke Street, which is a mall in the city. He actually had been, the police was chasing him or whatever. He's actually he actually took his car and went into shops and onto the footpath where only trams goes through there. And so he killed a very young baby. And the parents were Muslim. So the mother was, I think, from Indonesia, Muslim background. Father was Australian, but was following some of the Muslim religion. I went to that funeral as a president of that interfaith because it was in my local mosque. That was part of the thing that marks me, like whatever other things that we may have done. And at the time, I actually embraced the mother who just of course, she was still shell-shocked. But even despite that, she was trying to put a smile on. And the family and, big men, whatever, were all crying because this is a life cut short. And the father was beside himself. And it still brings tears to my eye when I talk about it. And it's here. It's actually sitting here. And what one person who had complete disregard for life just did in that day and killed a lot of people. There were tourists. There were people from Perth that came in, one of the young doctors, I think, and that somehow connected. My sister knew them in Perth because my sisters are in Perth. But again, and I didn't know this family beforehand. I had no idea because I would have met the people around, but I don't always know everyone. But to see that funeral, to see that suffering, to see people coming together to grieve, it didn't matter what religion you're at. That religion had nothing. It was a ritual they did that they had to do, and that was part of the grieving process. But it's something that actually marked me in a way that it didn't matter whether you were white, black. It didn't matter. It didn't matter what religion you're at. This is the coming of a community to mourn someone's child. We can be diverse. We can have different views of even God or what God is. But I think God is beyond that. It's much more than this. It's not just one religion or two religion or several religion or hundreds of religion. God is much, much bigger than that. And for me, this is where, when I look at this and I thought, whoa, and having been brought up in a society that was already multi-faith, multiracial, multicultural, it's run of the mill for me. And this is, I think, as it should be. So everyone finds their path. And then people say to me, oh no, Christ is the way. And I said, so excuse me, without Christ, you're going to die in hell. I said, excuse me. So are you telling me my brother, who is not a Catholic, is going to go and die in hell? Get real. So what are you telling me? Right. If we take that literal context of things. So because he chose not to be a baptized Catholic, so who tells you that you're the only one that's heaven is guaranteed for you?
Monopoly for one group.
Exactly. So it's really, so, sometimes I do challenge people. I have had people, even in the Catholic Church, and very early on, I was chair of the social justice. And we were doing something, I think, for the Aboriginal people and raising some money. And somebody, because I don't know whether you heard of her, there's Pauline Hanson that was very anti-Aboriginal people and telling Aboriginal people, go back to your country. I said, excuse me, you are in the country of the Aboriginal people. So let's just wind this back. Who telling me that I don't think those people deserve whatever. And I said, what do you mean those people deserve? And so for me, it's a way to then educate the person about, the injustices that has happened. And I think in some ways I feel sorry because as social workers in those times, they carried out some of the thing about removing children because they were being mandated to do this. And so we got a bad rap in Australia as social workers that we were part of that issues. I mean, I wasn't even in Australia at that time, but I wasn't even a social worker at the time. But again, it's something that carries with our profession about removing children, in those days where they thought that policy were right. Again, it's about, but I suppose I grew up with a curiosity and a way of how to question things and not to let status quo be dictated in a way by status quo.
Yes.
I think I had a family also that we had discussion around the table. We had politicians come for dinner at home. And so it was always an open thing.
Yes. Well, this was a wonderfully rich conversation. Thank you, Paola. For people who have enjoyed our conversation, is there a way you'd like them to be in touch with you?
They can write to me at the practicalcompassion945@gmail.com. And then at the moment, because I am probably with John and some other people, we're trying to put a cooperative together to sort of teach the mindful self-compassion and some of the things that John has done. We are looking at moving it into a cooperative. So at the moment, they can still go on John's website.
thinkinghealthy.com.au.
Yes, so they'll find my name there, but they can also directly get me through my email, even for spiritual direction or for mindful self-compassion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
See you. Bye.
Thanks for listening today.
If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll hit subscribe, leave us a great rating or review, and spread the word. You can also go to noblemindpodcast.com to join our email list. You'll get a weekly behind-the-scenes message, news, announcements, and other special goodies we come up with just for you. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.